Most people watch the news, see the horror in the world, and think to themselves, I can't imagine how hard that is. And then they change the channel because it's too painful to watch. Advocates, on the other hand, step up every single day to sit right next to people feeling pain. They meet people on the worst days of their lives. Victim advocates have a really unique role in this world. My work is a constant love letter to victim advocates to sit with people in the depths of hell. For their bravery, I want to thank every victim advocate on this planet. And although my role as a trainer is to teach advocates skills and theories that they may use in the line of duty, I often find that the advocates teach me much more. This podcast is my nod to the brilliant people who've attended my workshops and opened my eyes to new ideas every day. I'm Dr. Kate Watson, and this is Advocate Insights.
Welcome to Advocate Insights. I'm Dr. Kate Watson, and I have another fantastic guest with me today. Today, we're joined by Amanda from domesticshelters.org and also the podcast called Toxic. So, Amanda, what else can you tell us about you?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Watson, for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And I'm impressed by everything that you do with your platform. So thank you for speaking out on the things that you do. As for myself, I am the editor-in-chief of domesticshelters.org. We are a national nonprofit, and it's a website that helps people connect with resources regarding domestic violence and other types of intimate partner abuse, traumas and things like that. And then a spinoff of that, not necessarily related to domestic shelters, but related to the work that I do with them, is a podcast called Toxic. And it's sort of a space where I feel like I can speak a little bit more off the cuff on some of these topics, get into them a little bit more with my best friend, Jenna Brandel. She's my co-host, and we kind of dismantle some myths and stereotypes about toxic masculinity, because I know it's a big buzzword and some people are turned off by that, but I feel like it's a really important discussion to have around what that means and how that plays into the ongoing epidemic of abuse.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've got me curious then. I mean, I know we have a bunch of things we want to talk about today, but I think I want to start with, where can people find your podcast? If they're already thinking, when this one's over, I know where I'm turning next. Where can they find it?
Sure. Well, they can go to toxicthepodcast.com, and that will link you right to the podcast itself if you can't find it on any other platform. But we're on every platform that you would listen to podcasts on: Apple, Spotify, etc. So look us up. We are not the Britney Spears podcast. I think that one is actually now defunct, but that one shares our name, and they were really popular for a while. So I think people thought for a while. I'd gotten some requests from other reporters asking me to speak on Britney related topics. And I was like, that's not me, but good for them.
You know what? Good for them, but also good for you. You have outlived the Britney Spears podcast. You're still going.
I know.
And they're not. Okay. Anyway, when we first spoke, you and I, we were thinking of all kinds of things that we might be able to share with the Advocate Insights audience. And, what really stood out to me, Amanda, is you had some great points to make about the accessibility of information for folks out there who maybe need to learn about domestic violence or intimate partner violence, and just the timeliness of that. So can you remind me what we were saying about that maybe our audience would like to hear?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it is so important for there to be a wide range of resources available for survivors. And what I mean by that is the work that advocates do on hotlines and the work that advocates do at shelters is so vitally important. But there are so many more resources beyond that as well that can help survivors, because not every survivor feels comfortable doing the same thing, which would be like calling a hotline or visiting a shelter or going to a support group and things like that. So domesticshelters.org has thousands of articles that cover pretty much every facet of domestic violence. And I've written a lot of them. I've been a journalist my whole life. And for the last decade or more, I've covered exclusively domestic violence. And so through that work, we have uncovered just a wealth of different facets of this topic that need to be discussed. Because I think that there is a stereotype that domestic violence looks like one thing, and this is what most people recognize it as. And if it doesn't fit that mold, then it's not really domestic violence. But it actually is so wide-reaching and has so many different sort of ways that it manifests, that the more education we can give to survivors or people who don't even know that they are victims of domestic violence, who are in a relationship where they just feel unsafe, but they don't really know what's going on, then the more we can reach them sooner. Because I think that the main key is to reach survivors before things escalate to a point where they can't get out, where they can't get out safely, or they're at risk for homicide. And so I just feel really, really strongly about having these conversations. It's one of the reasons I started Toxic, is because I wanted to have this conversation more and more broadly than just covering it as a, here's 5 things you should know. Here's 10 red flags you should know. Those are all important. But when it boils down to it, what does it look like in a woman's life? And I'm not saying that men can't be victims of domestic violence. They absolutely can. But by and large, it's going to be women who are victimized by male partners. So that's mainly the audience that we speak to.
I'm thinking about your work as a journalist and how I'm just so appreciative that you want the news out there, the headline out there, to be information is available, resources are available, there is help for you, rather than what might be the more eye-catching headline that I see in news reports, which is so-and-so's been murdered. Like those eye-catching headlines are the moments that we capture that are just too late. But you're talking about the importance of getting information out there to prevent these really horrific events. And I think that's just something I'm kind of sitting with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a journalist, I feel like I'm betraying my own by saying that so much media is just sensationalized headlines, but it's because that's what grabs people's attention, and that's what gets them clicks, and then that's what gets them profit, and that's what allows them to keep existing as a publication. So I understand the motivation for that, but when you look at overall how that affects the problem of domestic violence and how we've all become so desensitized to it because it's just murder this and murder that and homicide this and true crime series here and made for TV movie here and this person is missing, who could have done it? Like, we all know it was the partner. Like, we all know it was. And the only time we care about it is after this person is missing or presumed dead or found dead. And then we make this big splashy story about everybody's reactions to it, everybody's shocked reactions to it. And how could this have happened in our town and our neighborhood? And it's like, wow, if we could just rewind all of this hullabaloo like a year prior and started covering it then, right? My across the street neighbor is exhibiting these signs, right? Her partner is doing these things. Where is this going to go? I can tell you where it's going to go. It's going to go right down Homicide Lane. And like, we could stop it right here, or we could just wait and then later on be like, I had no idea this was happening. So like, that bugs me to no end, because what I really want to talk about more is the beginning part and stopping it there and really backing it up even more than that. I'm really passionate about talking to your kids about boundaries, consent, healthy relationships, because that's really, really where it starts. To get them before they even think about partnering up with somebody. And what does a healthy partner look like?
Yeah. I started to think about it because, as you were sort of introducing yourself, you said as a journalist, there's all these articles that you've graciously, made available, and what a service that you have at domesticshelters.org. But I guess as you were speaking, I thought, in the media that I consume or the news channels that I watch, I can't say that I have ever in my life caught an article or a piece that was covering the prevention of something that that was stopped before it became a problem. It's always so long after. So thank you for that. And, additionally, your point about speaking to kids about healthy boundaries. I mean, it starts with, allowing your kids to say, no, I don't want to hug today, or, to really set their own limits and respect them. And so these are the conversations that set the foundation. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's just so important. And so it's kind of like easy. It's like mind-bogglingly easy to start that, We did a poll on domesticshelters.org where we asked responders to say, like, when do you plan to talk to your child about boundaries? And the majority, 60%, said before the age of 4, which is so, I was so happy to see that.
Yeah.
And because I didn't expect that. And I really think that that's where it has to start. This is your body, your boundaries. And I want you to know that for the rest of your life. And I want that to become normalized, not like some special privilege you have. I'm a mom of 2, and I've started that with my kids so early. I'm your mom, but do you want me to help you get dressed? Like, it's your choice. Do you want me to do this? Like, can I touch your body in this way? Do you want a hug, or do you want a little space? It's your say, and you get to say that for all the rest of your days.
Yeah. Yeah. And, when I was a kid, I never heard the word boundary. So I was deep into a master's degree in psychology before I started hearing people talk about boundaries. And I remember one of my professors using the phrase and asking me a question, and I wasn't even really sure what she was talking about. And so it is a different world gosh, I feel old when I say kids today, but kids today are learning, what it means to say, no, thank you. I would like some space right now. And that was an option I never felt I had. And so when you think about whether it's your podcast or the visitors to domesticshelters.org, what are the messages that you really hope they come away with? Like when you think about what you're putting out into the world in terms of information, is there something that's standing out lately that you're hoping kind of jumps out as a message received?
That's a good question. I think more than anything, letting survivors have control over their own story and having the voice that they want to have. I think this might be a hot button issue, and some people might be like, oh no, not this. But the Amber Heard Johnny Depp case really riled me up for those reasons, because she wasn't allowed to speak out about her victimization. Like, she was put on trial, and the trial wasn't about whether or not Johnny Depp abused her. It was whether or not she was allowed to speak on it. And they found it that she couldn't, right? She was fined for speaking out on it. And so it's this ongoing silencing of women who speak out. And as soon as women speak out, they are put on trial and said, did that really happen to you? Did it happen like you said it did? I mean, how many true crime podcasts are out there that just take a survivor story and put it into like 12 parts of like examining down to the minute detail whether or not she's telling the truth about what happened, And I'm an advocate as well as a journalist, and my default is to believe survivors. Because I would rather be wrong about that than to be wrong about not believing a survivor. And that doesn't mean that, anybody can do or say anything and I just carte blanche, just say, well, obviously that's the truth. But when it comes to domestic violence, I just truly believe that survivors are not looking for fame, and they're not looking for a payday from that, and they are looking to share their stories. And I think that when people's instincts tell them like, well, that's not true, right? Like Amber Heard just wanted to be rich. She just wanted her name in the papers and all that stuff. I think it's important that people take a second and look at those internalized feelings that they have of victim blaming and see where that comes from. Does that
Yeah.
come from someone blaming you in your past? Does that come from someone not believing you? Does that come from your fear that if it can happen to her, it could happen to you? Like, where does that come from when we don't believe women, especially when women don't believe women? Where does that stem from? If we took a second and sort of examined that, would we get to a deeper understanding of like our own biases and our own fears and our own prejudices and things like that? So that was a really long-winded answer to your question. But really, what I really want survivors to know is that they have a voice and that they shouldn't let other people silence it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always say, unless you are the jury in a court case, you have the luxury of just believing. Because, like, who cares if you're wrong? Like,
Mhm.
I think that's sort of the beauty of it. Like, isn't it nice that I can just believe someone who's telling me they've been harmed? That I'm not burdened by, like, well, I'm actually a jury member in this case. Like, as long as you're not, like,
Right.
why not just believe then? Like, like, so what? And maybe someday I will be the jury member and I'll have to think about it a little bit differently. But until that day comes, I think it's a burden off my shoulders to just say, I think I'll just believe.
Exactly. And that believing could come in the form of just simply validating somebody. Even let's say if you doubt certain parts of someone's story when they tell it to you, like maybe maybe you have some questions, right? You don't need to be the jury unless, like you said, you're actually a juror in a trial, right? But if someone talks to you about something that they experienced, to at least validate them and say, I hear you. I understand that. That must have been hard. I get that. I
Yeah.
believe you. I see you. I hold space for you. Like if we let people have that voice, then they won't feel so afraid to come forward because the more victims who are afraid to come forward, the more abusers who get to just flourish, right, in the darkness and just do whatever they want to do without consequence because they know that they've scared the victims into speaking out.
Yeah. And I think the challenge for a lot of people is sticking to that, like this commitment to believing survivors, even when it's someone you love and trust who's being accused of being the perpetrator. Even when it's your best friend, even when it's your own son or daughter, but still believing survivors, even in that moment. That I've seen a lot of people who plaster the believe her sticker on their car, quickly revert back to doubting her when it's their loved one who's been accused.
Yeah. I mean, that's got to be difficult. And like, what I would say to those people is like, you can experience both things at once. I mean, it's like when Bill Cosby was accused of sexual assault, and we were all like, what? Not Bill Cosby, right? And then like drugged like, a couple dozen women. You're like, what the mother? But like, you can believe these survivors and you can also feel sadness that this person that you admired is now a completely different person. I can't imagine what it's like if it's your own family member or even like, someone closer to your own spouse is accused of something, God forbid, but it's like it doesn't it doesn't change the fact that survivors come forward because they need to tell that story. They need to get justice in whatever way that looks like. They need to be safe. They need to be heard. They need that person to be stopped.
It's always interesting to me when people say, so and so is just looking for fame or 15 minutes of fame. I'm like, how many of Bill Cosby's accusers can you even name right now? Like, and I
Yes,
and I was following that
exactly.
story. I was following
Yeah.
it, but I can't name a single one of them, honestly. And even like Harvey Weinstein, it's kind of hard to remember who was all involved with that. Like, so I don't think a whole lot of fame came from those accusations. And I
No,
think
because
about that.
everyone who stepped forward pretty much to speak out against Harvey Weinstein was then silenced and blackballed by Hollywood, you
Mhm.
know? So that's the price that women pay for stepping forward. I mean, Amber Heard is hated by so many people because she spoke out. She's not more famous, if anything, she's infamous now for this supposed crime of speaking out against her abusive partner, for defaming someone that was beloved. Like it is literally just accusing women of speaking out against abusers for their own benefit is just another way to shame them and silence them. It's not actually, I truly don't believe it's actually something people believe happens. Show me like a person who got really rich off of speaking out against abuse. Like, and even if that was true, that's not the way anyone wants to get rich.
Is there anything, Amanda, that you haven't gotten the chance to say today that you'd like to make sure you say while you're with us?
I would say that if there are survivors who are listening to this, that they know that there are people out there who will help them. And I've spoken to quite a few survivors in my career who have come up against many roadblocks when trying to escape an abusive partner. Maybe the first hotline they called wasn't the most supportive hotline. Maybe the shelter they called was full. Maybe they reached out to a family member and that family member didn't believe them. And it's so unfortunate to hear these things happen, but I would just encourage those individuals to keep looking because there are people and resources out there that will help you, and your safety and your health is the most important thing. And don't give up that, especially when you have children involved. You break that cycle, get them out. Like it breaks my heart that a lot of survivors have to kind of be their own hero and save themselves in these scenarios, but I would really encourage them to just keep going because it's worth it on the other side. So many survivors that I've spoken to have gotten out just so worth it, so much better.
You're saying there's hope and please don't quit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today. To the listeners, if you have any questions or comments or feedback, please send me a message using Kate at advocacyacademy.org. That's Kate, Kate, at Advocacy Academy, like it's all one word, .org. Check out the Toxic podcast, not the Britney Spears one, which you probably can't find right now anyway. But it's toxicthepodcast.com. Is that correct?
It is. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And check us out next time when we explore more advocate insights.